Welcome back to school, half of everybody. And you're lucky, two-thirds of you that are in school have Mrs. Williams and Mr. Jarrisall there to help you because they're awesome at math. So you basically have two teachers, which is twice as good as one for anybody out there doing the math. All right, there's a lot going on here. Let me explain what I've written. The subject is evaluate a function for a given value. This was the second standard of the year where you're substituting in a number for x and then doing the math. What does it look like? How do you know to substitute a number in for x? How do you know this is this type of problem? When you see that, when you see f with a number in parentheses, they're saying put that number in for x. Into what? Into an equation that might look like this, a function. So f of x is equal to all of this. So right now you have an x in these blank spots, but they want you to put a -1 into there. Once you do that, then you follow PEMDAS, order of operations, to just figure out what this equals. What is your final number? So all these types of problems that you see that say evaluate a function for a given value and you see a number inside a parenthesis, your answer is going to be a single number. You got to boil all this down into one number. That's going to be your answer. And you do that by following PEMDAS. So let me switch slates here and I'll go through this example with you. All right, f of -1 means put a -1 in wherever you see x. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm not really doing any math. I'm just substituting out the tired old x for the fresh and ready to play -1. Now notice what I did there at the end. Minus x. A lot of people are just going to say -1 right here. They're just going to plug a 1 in and say this is -1. Well, because it's a minus. It's a minus. Why wouldn't it be -1? Well, sometimes it's easier to put your x's in parentheses like this because it's minus the value of x. And the value of x is -1, so it's actually minus -1. If this was just going to be minus +1, this would have to be a +1, and then you would just say it's -1 because you're subtracting the value of x. In this case, the value of x is a +1, so you're subtracting 1. But that's not how I wrote the problem. The problem was f of -1, so you're subtracting a -1. You got to be careful on that. The math on these problems aren't that difficult. It's the positives and negatives that are going to mess people up like it has since the beginning of time. So be careful on your positives and negatives. All right, now we follow PEMDAS. P stands for parentheses, so do what's inside the parentheses first, which is -1 minus 2. So I'm going to leave everything else the same, except in my parentheses, -1 minus 2, -3. I'm going to change my minus a negative into a plus. Remember, when you subtract a negative, you're adding. It's like subtracting something from your bank account is taking something out, and what you're taking out is a negative amount. You're taking out debt from your account. That's like adding value to your account. You're getting rid of debt. That's a good thing. A double negative is a positive. I do not understand this. Not means that you do. I do not understand this means you understand it. Two negatives flip you back to a positive. All right, so that's a plus. All right, we did the P for PEMDAS. Now we do the E for exponents, which means to square the -3. And when you square something, you multiply it by itself. So -3 times -3 is -3 squared, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So you end up with 3 times 9 plus 1. Now we're to multiply and divide. The reason I wrote the PEMDAS the way I did with the M and the D right next to each other is because you don't necessarily have to multiply before you divide. They're equal, they're even. You just got to do left to right, like you read left to right, and you multiply or divide depending on what comes first. In this case, you don't have to worry about it because there is no division. So you multiply and get 27, and then finally you'll add 1 for 28. So after you substituted in a -1 into the function given to you, 28 is your answer, just like I said on that first page, or the first whiteboard, was that all these problems are going to get you down to one single number as your answer. If you're not getting a single number as your answer, you're doing something wrong. If you have like 28 plus x, then something's not right. Or if you have 28 squared, you didn't finish it. You got to square it. You should just have a number at the end. All right, the variations to these types of problems. Well, there's two of them. One of them is a table. So let me make up a function here for you. F of x is equal to x to the third plus 3x squared plus 5. If you have a table, like an input-output table, they're going to give you multiple values for x. So say they give you -1, 2, and 3. What they just did to you there was turn this one problem into 3 problems. So now you have to substitute in a -1, see what number you get, and put that in the y column right across from -1. Then you got to start over, substitute in the +2, get a number, and then start over, substitute in a 3, get a number, and then you're finally done. So 3 problems in one. It's annoying, but that's life in algebra, people. Get used to it. All right, let me make some room for myself here. We had to do -1, 2, and 3. I'm not going to go through all these for you, but I will go through -1 because I want to make a point with the x to the third power. See how I put the -1 in parentheses? It kind of helps you remember to substitute in a -1. So like on the last one, minus a negative, it'll help you not make that mistake of just saying -1 when that last one was really +1 at the end. Okay, back to this one. The reason I chose -1 is because when you go to the third power, now you're multiplying that -1 3 times in a row. That's an odd amount of times. And when you multiply an odd amount of times a negative number, you end up with a negative answer. What do I mean? Look, an even amount of negative numbers, 2 negative numbers, -1 times -1 makes a +1. That third -1, the odd one, is going to flip you back to negative because a positive times a negative is a negative. So -1 squared is +1, but -1 to the third power is -1. So you got to be careful on that. Make sure you're paying attention to your detail and your exponents. All right, so -1 to the third power is -1 plus 3 times -1 squared. We already talked about -1 squared is 1 plus 5. Now anything times 1 is itself, so that's just +3 plus 5. So now you have -1 plus 3 plus 5. $1 in debt, you add $3 to it, now you're $2 on the good side, plus another 5, you're $7 on the good side. So -1 was 7, and then you would have to continue this problem by erasing all of this and starting over with 2 in for those x's. And do that work, which I am not going to do for you. I've made my point, I think, with the tables. So there's 3 parts to that problem. And then you could have a third type of problem with this standard. And it might just tell you that f of -1 is equal to 7. It's like, okay, I'll do the work for you. I put the -1 into the problem, and it came out as a 7. Boom, we're done. You're welcome. So how do they turn this into a problem? They give you 4 choices on which equation you put the -1 into to make it a 7. So choice A might look something like this. 3x plus 4. That looks like it might be right because 3 plus 4 is 7. We put a 1 in there, we got 3 plus 4. But be careful, you're not putting a 1 in there, you're putting a -1 in there. So this is actually 3 times -1, which gives you a -3 plus 4, which is actually +1, not 7. Therefore, choice A is incorrect. Do not pick A. You'll have to move on to choice B and see if that one is right. So just like the last problem was kind of like 3 problems in one, this could potentially be 4 problems in one, depending on when you find the right answer. If it's answer D or choice D and you don't try D till your 4th try, you just did 4 problems in one. So sorry, you got to hope you get lucky and pick the right answer first, and you plug in -1 and you get 7, then you're done. It was only like 1 problem. So let's move on to B here. Let's say choice B is x squared minus 3x plus 4. That looks a little crazy, but it might be right. So let me plug that in and see what I get. You plug in a -1 and you square it, and then a -1 for x. So you square a negative, you get a positive. This is a negative times a negative. You got to remember that the sign in front of the number stays with the number. So this is a negative times a negative, which makes it a positive. So you get 3, and then you had 4, and oh, we were so close. We got 8 instead of 7. So this is what you have to do. Eventually, you're going to come across the correct answer. Even if it's not A or B, you got to keep working until you find it in C or D. So that's how you evaluate a function at a given value.